Welcome. I am so glad you could join us. Here, in this quiet space, we let our curiosity wander without hurry. We are not bound by the ticking of clocks, but by the slow, immense, and patient rhythm of geological time. Tonight, we are going to journey into the age that followed the giants, the world that was born from the ashes of the great extinction. We are going to explore the Cenozoic, the era of new life, the age of mammals, our age. Before we begin, take a moment to consider where you are right now. Is the world around you settling into the quiet of the evening, or is it just beginning to stir with the first light of dawn? It is a remarkable thing to sit here in our own brief and fleeting moment in time and to cast our minds back across 66 million years of history to a world that existed after the dinosaurs, but long, long before us. If this slow exploration feels soothing to your mind, perhaps consider leaving a like or subscribing if you would like to join us for more of these calm journeys. It is a quiet way to help others find this little corner of time where we can wonder about our planet's incredible story together. So, let us begin. Let us close our eyes, if we wish, and let go of the familiar world around us. Let go of the familiar continents on our maps, the familiar sounds in our streets, the familiar green of our modern landscapes. We must first step into a world of profound silence, a world that was, for a time, almost empty. The great catastrophe that ended the Cretaceous period had passed. The fires had died down, the long dark winter had ended, and the sun, after years of being hidden behind a veil of dust and soot, was finally returning to a planet that had been irrevocably changed. Imagine the first true dawn of the Paleocene epoch. The light that touches the land is weak and hazy, filtering through an atmosphere still thick with aerosols. It illuminates a ghostly landscape. The great, vibrant forests of the late Cretaceous are gone, replaced by skeletal, blackened husks of trees that stand like silent monuments to a fallen world. The ground is covered in a thick, gray blanket of ash and iridium-rich clay, the fingerprint of the great impact. The air, once filled with the deep, resonant calls of hadrosaurs and the terrifying roar of the tyrant king, is now almost silent. The only sounds are the whisper of the wind through the dead branches, the slow trickle of debris-choked rivers, and perhaps, if you listen very closely, the quiet, furtive rustling of the survivors. This was not a world of giants. It was a world inherited by the small, the humble, and the resilient. To understand the beginning of the Cenozoic, we must first meet these inheritors in the tangled roots of a fallen sycamore. A small, furry creature, no larger than a modern shrew, sniffs at the damp air. It is a mammal, one of our own distant ancestors. For 150 million years, its lineage had lived a life of stealth and shadow, a nocturnal existence, spent hiding from the colossal reptiles that had ruled the day. But the very traits that had been forged in that long period of suppression were the keys to its survival. Its small size meant it needed very little food. Its warm-blooded metabolism and coat of fur helped it endure the freezing cold of the impact winter. Its habit of living in a deep burrow had shielded it from the initial fiery heat blast, and its generalist diet, its ability to eat insects, worms, roots, and the dormant seeds that lay buried in the soil, allowed it to find sustenance in a world where the great green buffet of the Cretaceous had vanished. It was not alone. In the skeletal branches above, a small feathered creature hops from twig to twig. It is a bird, but more specifically, it is a dinosaur, a direct descendant of the great theropods, a member of the single lineage that had passed through the crucible of the extinction. The great toothed birds of the Cretaceous forests had likely perished along with their homes, but a few groups of small, ground-dwelling birds, perhaps creatures similar to modern quail, had made it through. Their secret weapon was likely their beak. With no teeth, they were perfectly adapted to crack open and consume the one food source that was now abundant across the globe. The countless trillions of hardy seeds, a caloric savings account left behind by the dead plants. The dinosaur dynasty had not been entirely erased. It had been reduced to a few scattered survivors who now carried its legacy into this strange new world. And in the slow, murky rivers life had also endured. A crocodile, a living fossil from an even more ancient lineage of archosaurs, rests motionlessly in the shallows. Its cold-blooded metabolism was its salvation. Requiring only a fraction of the food needed by a warm-blooded animal, it could survive for months on a single meal, waiting patiently in the relatively buffered aquatic environment as the world above fell apart. It fed on the carcasses and decaying matter that washed into the rivers, a grim but reliable source of energy in a starving world. Alongside it were the turtles, their protective shells, a perfect bomb shelter against the chaos, and the amphibians, forever tied to the freshwater ecosystems that had proven to be the most resilient of all. This was the cast of characters for the dawn of a new age, a world of small, scurrying mammals, of ground-dwelling, seed-eating birds, and of patient, slow-metabolizing reptiles and amphibians. For thousands of years, the first stage of the planet's botanical recovery was a strange and monotonous one. The first plants to recolonize the ash-covered, poisoned soils were the hardy opportunists. The world became covered in a vast, global carpet of ferns. This fern spike, visible in the fossil record, is the sign of a planetary ecosystem rebooting itself. Imagine a landscape stretching to the horizon, clothed not in forests or grasslands, but in a single, uniform, and seemingly endless prairie of green ferns. In this quiet, eerie world of ferns, the first act of the Age of Mammals began. With the great herbivores gone, the forests, when they did begin to return, grew back in a dense and tangled way, with no giant browsers to thin them. And with the great predators gone, the world was, for a time, a relatively safe place. It was in this environment, this empty stage, that the surviving mammals began to experiment. No longer confined to the role of a tiny, nocturnal insect eater, they started to explore the countless vacant ecological niches. Within the first few 100,000 years of the Paleocene, they began to radiate. Some grew a little larger, some adapted to eating the returning plants, some began to specialize in hunting other small animals. This was the very beginning of the great mammalian radiation, the explosive diversification that would, over the coming millions of years, produce the entire magnificent array of mammals that we know today. The world was a blank canvas, an unprecedented evolutionary opportunity. The ghosts of the great dinosaurs were fading, and a new dynasty was quietly and tentatively taking its first, hesitant steps onto the empty stage. And as we drift deeper into this new Cenozoic world, we will follow their story, piece by piece. We will see the first, strange, experimental forms that mammals took. We will witness the rise of the first great mammalian predators and herbivores. We will see the continents continue their slow drift, and the climate continue to change, shaping this new age of life. Because to ask what the Earth was like during the Cenozoic is not to get one simple picture. It is to open a long and winding journey, a journey through our own, more recent, deep history, the history of the world that we, ourselves, would one day inherit. The world that emerged from the long, dark winter was a world of profound and unsettling simplicity. For 100 million years, the Earth had been a place of intricate complexity, of vast herds and mighty predators, of ecosystems woven from a million different threads of interaction. Now that tapestry had been burned away, and life had to begin weaving itself anew from the few hardy threads that remained. This first chapter of the Cenozoic, the Paleocene epoch, which lasted for 10 million years, was an age of recovery, of experimentation, and of strange transitional beauty. Let us first revisit the landscape of this newborn world. The fern spike, that first desperate greening of the poisoned soils, was a temporary phase. As the planet's climate, freed from the chilling grip of the impact winter, began to stabilize and warm, the true survivors of the botanical kingdom began their slow reconquest. The first forests to rise from the ashes were not the familiar, broad-leafed woodlands of today. They were strange, low-diversity forests, often dominated by just a few hardy, fast-growing species of disaster taxa. Imagine walking through a woodland where almost every tree is the same, a world of ancient relatives of walnuts and sycamores, their canopies creating a deep and uniform shade. The ground beneath is still covered in a thick carpet of ferns, but now, the first flowering shrubs and herbs are beginning to push their way through, their small, simple blossoms, adding the first touches of new color to a world that had been rendered in monochrome. The air itself was different. The immense global firestorms and the vaporization of carbonate rocks had released a colossal amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The world of the Paleocene was a hothouse, a planet with a supercharged greenhouse effect. It was significantly warmer than our own modern world, and this warmth was distributed almost evenly across the globe. There were no polar ice caps, and lush, subtropical, and even tropical forests grew in the high latitudes of what are now Alaska, Greenland, and Antarctica. Fossilized palm trees and the remains of crocodile-like reptiles found in these polar regions are a silent testament to a world that was for a time a global jungle. And it was in these strange, warm, and silent global forests that the great mammalian experiment began. The small, shrew-like creatures that had scurried from their burrows into the fern world now found themselves in a paradise of opportunity. The world was full of plants, with no large herbivores to eat them, and the world was empty of large predators. For the first time, being small was no longer a requirement for survival. And so, the mammals began to grow. This first great evolutionary radiation was not a neat and orderly affair. It was a chaotic, experimental, and often bizarre explosion of new forms, as evolution threw everything it had at the wall to see what would stick. Many of these first experiments were evolutionary dead ends, strange creatures that would flourish for a few million years in this strange new world before vanishing forever. Let us meet some of these first pioneers. Browsing on the soft leaves and fruits of the new forests was a creature like Pantalambda. It was one of the first mammals to achieve a respectable size, perhaps as large as a modern sheep. It was a pantodont, an early, experimental group of herbivores. It was a clumsy, stout-bodied animal, walking on five-toed flat feet, with a small, simple brain and teeth that were not yet highly specialized for grinding tough plants. It was not a fast runner, nor was it a particularly intelligent animal. It didn't need to be. In a world with few predators, it was enough to simply be large. Another of these strange, early herbivores was Ctenodion. This was a powerfully built creature, the size of a pig, with immense forelimbs and huge clawed hands. It was a digger, likely using its great claws to unearth the tough roots and tubers that were abundant in the forest floor. Its teeth were strange and peg-like, and they grew continuously throughout its life, an adaptation to a diet of abrasive, gritty food. With this new and expanding buffet of herbivores, the first true mammalian predators also began to evolve, but these were not the sleek, efficient hunters of our modern world. The apex predators of the Paleocene were a strange and formidable group called the Mesonychids. A creature like Mesonyx was the size of a wolf, but it was not a wolf. Its head was large and long, its brain was small, and its teeth were simple, crushing triangles of bone. Most strangely of all, its feet did not end in claws, but in small hoof-like toes. It was a wolf in sheep's clothing, a powerful hunter that likely ran down the slow, clumsy pantodonts of its time. And in the trees, a new kind of mammal was beginning its own quiet revolution. These were the Plesiadapiforms, a diverse and successful group of primate-like mammals. A creature like Plesiadapis looked something like a squirrel, with a long, bushy tail and claws for climbing. But its teeth and skull show the first, faint hints of the features that would one day define our own primate lineage. They were not our direct ancestors, but they were our close cousins, and their flourishing in the Paleocene forests was the first chapter in the long and winding story that would, 60 million years later, lead to us. But the most spectacular and terrifying predators of the Paleocene were not mammals at all. They were a final, magnificent echo of the age of dinosaurs, with the great theropods gone. The niche of the large terrestrial predator was for a time reclaimed by the birds. These were the terror birds, giant, flightless descendants of the smaller birds that had survived the extinction. In South America and Europe, A creature like Gastornis, a 2-meter-tall behemoth, stalked the forests. It had a massive, powerful head and a huge hooked beak, a weapon capable of delivering a devastating, axe-like blow. For millions of years, this great dinosaurian ghost was the undisputed king of the Paleocene jungle, a final, triumphant, and terrifying reminder of the dynasty that the world had lost. And what of the other great survivors? In the warm, fresh waters of the recovering world, the crocodiles, alligators, and their relatives thrived. They had passed through the extinction with relative ease, and in the hothouse world of the Paleocene, they diversified and spread, becoming the dominant aquatic predators across the globe. Some, like the mighty Titanoboa, a colossal snake from South America that could reach lengths of over 13 meters or 43 feet, became the largest predators of their kind. The world of the Paleocene was a strange and unbalanced one, a world where the old guard of the reptiles still held sway in the water and the air, while the new and experimental mammals were just beginning to find their feet on the land. This strange, experimental, and hothouse world, this first chapter of the Cenozoic, lasted for 10 million years. It was an age of recovery, a time for the biosphere to heal its wounds and to begin the long process of rebuilding the complexity that had been lost. It was an age of ghosts, haunted by the memory of the dinosaurs, and an age of pioneers, as our own mammalian ancestors took their first, tentative steps out of the shadows and into the light. But the stability of this new world was itself an illusion. The intense greenhouse climate of the Paleocene was about to be pushed into an even more extreme state, a planetary fever spike that would once again reshape the world and set the stage for the next great chapter in the Age of Mammals. The Paleocene epoch was an age of recovery, but it was also an age of immense and building heat. The colossal amount of carbon dioxide that had been released into the atmosphere during the end Cretaceous cataclysm, combined with the planet's own complex geological cycles, was turning up the global thermostat. This slow warming trend culminated around 56 million years ago in a geologically sudden and extreme global warming event known as the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, or PATM. Over a period of just a few thousand years, a massive new pulse of carbon, likely from the volcanic baking of organic-rich sediments or the melting of frozen methane hydrates on the seafloor, was injected into the atmosphere. Global temperatures soared by another 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. The world was plunged into a planetary fever dream. This was the beginning of the Eocene epoch, the true zenith of the Cenozoic hothouse. For the next 20 million years, the Earth was hotter than it had been for almost 100 million years. There were no permanent ice caps at the poles. The oceans were warm from the surface to the abyssal deep, and the land was covered, from the equator to the high Arctic and the shores of Antarctica, in lush, dense, and sprawling tropical and subtropical rainforests. Fossils of palm trees, crocodiles, and warm-weather turtles have been found in places that are now the frozen wastes of northern Canada and Siberia. The world was a global jungle, a warm, wet, and incredibly productive planet. And in this global jungle, the first strange experiments of the mammalian radiation reached their bizarre and spectacular peak. These were the archaic mammals, lineages that had risen to prominence in the Paleocene, and now produced their largest and most impressive forms. The role of the large herbivore was filled by creatures like the pantodonts, and by a new and even stranger group called the Dinosaurs. Their most famous member was Euanthitherium. This was a creature the size of a modern rhinoceros, a bulky, powerful herbivore that roamed the forests of North America and Asia. Its head was its most striking feature, adorned with 6 strange, bony, knob-like horns and a pair of long, saber-like canine teeth that pointed downwards from its upper jaw. It was a bizarre and intimidating beast, a true giant of the Eocene, but it was also a representative of a dying dynasty. Its brain was remarkably small for its body size, and its teeth were simple and inefficient. It was a first, clumsy draft of a large mammal. The role of the apex predator was also still held by archaic lineages. The mesonychids continued to thrive for a time, But the most formidable hunters of the early Eocene were the creodonts, a creature like hyenodon, despite its name, was not a true hyena, but a member of this extinct order of carnivorous mammals. Some species of hyenodon grew to the size of a large bear, with a massive skull and powerful jaws lined with teeth that were designed not for complex slicing, but for simple, brutal, bone-crushing power. These archaic mammals, both the strange horned herbivores and the powerful, brutish predators, were the rulers of the early Eocene world, but their reign was destined to be a short one, for in the dense humid undergrowth of their great jungle world, a new and more sophisticated generation of mammals was quietly rising. The warm, stable, and productive world of the Eocene was the crucible for the great radiation of modern mammalian orders. At the beginning of this epoch, a host of new and familiar lineages appeared almost simultaneously in the fossil record across the northern continents. The first of the parasitactyls, the odd-toed ungulates, appeared. Among them were the first hornless rhinoceroses and the colossal, extinct brontotheres, like megafauna, a giant with a strange forked, bony horn on the end of its nose. But the most famous of these were the first horses, a creature like Hyracotherium, often called Eohippus or the dawn horse, was a small, delicate animal, no larger than a fox. It had 4 toes on its front feet and 3 on its back, and it did not graze on grass, but browsed on the soft leaves and fruits of the dense forest undergrowth. It was a creature perfectly adapted to a life of quiet hiding in the Eocene jungle. At the same time, the first artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates, appeared. These were the ancestors of our modern deer, camels, pigs, and cattle. Early forms, like the rabbit-sized Diacodexis, were also small, forest-dwelling creatures, but they possessed a key advantage that would eventually allow them to become the most successful large herbivores on the planet: a more advanced and efficient digestive system. And in the great, globe-spanning canopy of the Eocene rainforests, our own lineage, the primates, was experiencing its golden age. The world was filled with a diverse array of lemur-like and tarsier-like creatures, perfectly adapted to a life of climbing, leaping, and feeding on the abundant fruits and insects of the treetops. The famous Ida fossil, a beautifully preserved specimen of a creature named Darwinius, gives us an incredible snapshot of one of these early primates, from its grasping hands and feet to the faint outline of its fur and the fossilized remains of its last meal of fruits and leaves. And as these new, more advanced herbivores began to spread, so too did a new generation of predators. The first of the carnivorans appeared, the ancestors of our modern cats and dogs. A creature like Myasis, small and weasel-like, possessed a key innovation that would give its descendants a decisive edge. Its teeth were evolving into the specialized slicing blades known as carnassials, a far more efficient tool for shearing flesh than the simple crushing teeth of the older credonts. And in the skies, the first true bats, like Acornicterus, took to the wing, their fossilized remains from the Eocene already showing the fully formed wings and enlarged coccyles in the inner ear that proved they were already masters of both powered flight and echolocation 50 million years ago. But the most incredible and dramatic evolutionary story of the Eocene did not take place on the land or in the air. It took place in the water. One group of artiodactyl mammals, a lineage of hoofed, land-dwelling creatures, began to return to the sea, initiating one of the most complete and beautifully documented evolutionary transitions in the entire fossil record. The story begins with a creature like Pachycetus from the early Eocene of Pakistan. It looked like a small wolf, and it lived on the land, near freshwater streams. But the bones of its inner ear had a unique structure, a signature adaptation for hearing underwater that is found only in one other group of animals, the whales. A few million years later, we find Ambulocetus, the walking whale. This was a creature the size of a large sea lion, with a long crocodile-like snout and powerful, webbed feet. It could still walk, clumsily, on the land, but it was a formidable ambush predator in the water. From there, the transition accelerated. Creatures like Rhodocetus became even more marine, with a more powerful tail for swimming and hind limbs that were shrinking and becoming less useful on land. And this journey culminates in the late Eocene with the magnificent and terrifying Basilosaurus. This was a true, fully aquatic whale, but it looked nothing like a modern one. Its body was immense and incredibly long and serpentine, up to 18 meters or 60 feet in length. It had a long snout filled with a terrifying combination of sharp, piercing front teeth and triangular, shearing back teeth. It was the apex predator of the late Eocene seas, and yet it still carried the memory of its terrestrial past. Near the back of its long body, it still possessed a pair of tiny, perfectly formed, but completely useless hind legs, a final, ghostly echo of a time 10 million years before, when its ancestors had walked on the land. This was the world of the Eocene, a vibrant, warm, and stable jungle planet, a world where the first, strange experiments of the mammalian radiation gave way to the great modern lineages that would define the rest of our age. It was a world where the first horses browsed in the forests, where the first primates leaped through the canopy, and where the first whales began to sing their first, ancient songs in the warm tropical seas. It was the great, green dawn of the Age of Mammals. For nearly 30 million years, from the ashes of the Great Extinction, the Earth had been a warm and stable paradise. The hothouse world of the Paleocene and the Eocene was a planet of immense biological productivity, a global greenhouse where life, particularly our own mammalian ancestors, had radiated into 1,000 new and wonderful forms. The forests teemed with the first primates, the first horses, and the first whales were beginning their conquest of the seas. It was an age of seemingly endless warmth and abundance, but deep in the southern hemisphere, a geological event of profound significance was slowly unfolding, an event that would pull a great climatic lever and plunge the entire planet into a new state of being. Throughout the early Cenozoic, the great southern continent of Antarctica, though located over the South Pole, had remained largely ice-free, connected by land bridges to both South America and Australia. This connection had a critical effect on the world's oceans. Warm, tropical ocean currents from the equator could flow southwards, bringing their heat to the Antarctic coast, keeping the continent temperate and preventing the formation of large ice sheets. But as the Eocene progressed, this ancient connection began to break. First, Australia drifted northwards, opening up a deep oceanic gateway. Then, more slowly, South America pulled away, and the Drake Passage, the waterway between the tip of South America and the Antarctic Peninsula, opened for the first time. This was a moment of profound and irreversible change for the planet's climate engine. With Antarctica now completely isolated in the Southern Ocean, a new and powerful ocean current was born, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. This great circular current began to flow, unimpeded, around the entire Antarctic continent. It acted as a colossal thermal barrier, a wall of cold water that prevented the warm currents from the equator from ever reaching the southern pole again. Isolated from the warmth of the tropics, the continent of Antarctica began to freeze. Over a period of a few 100,000 years, a geologically brief moment, colossal ice sheets, kilometers thick, grew and spread across the land. The world had grown a new pole cap. This event, which occurred around 34 million years ago, at the boundary between the Eocene and the subsequent Oligocene epoch, marked the great turning point of the Cenozoic. The planet shifted, permanently, from a warm, wet, greenhouse state into a cooler, drier, icehouse state. This was not a brief cold snap, it was a fundamental reorganization of the global climate system. The formation of the great Antarctic ice sheet locked up vast quantities of water, causing global sea levels to fall dramatically. The temperature gradient between the poles and the equator steepened, leading to stronger, more seasonal winds and weather patterns. The world became a cooler, drier, and more seasonal place. And this profound climatic shift had a devastating effect on the life that had evolved in the stable hothouse of the Eocene. The great, global, pole-to-pole rainforests could not survive in this new, cooler, and more seasonal world. They began to shrink and retreat, becoming confined to the warmer, wetter equatorial regions. And as the forests retreated, a new and revolutionary kind of habitat began to spread across the newly opened landscapes. This was the birth of the grasslands. These first grasslands of the Oligocene were not the vast, treeless prairies of today. They were likely more like open woodlands or savannas, a patchwork of grassy clearings interspersed with stands of hardy, drought-tolerant trees. But their appearance was a momentous event in the history of life. Grass is a fundamentally different kind of plant from the soft leaves of the forest. It is tough, fibrous, and filled with abrasive silica particles. It grows not from the tip of a leaf, but from the base, meaning it can be continuously grazed and still recover. This new, tough, and resilient vegetation created a whole new set of evolutionary challenges and opportunities for the world's herbivores. The great climatic and botanical revolution that marked the beginning of the Oligocene triggered a major extinction event, an event known in Europe as the Grande Découpe or the Great Break. The archaic mammals of the Eocene, with their small brains and simple, inefficient teeth, were not well equipped to deal with this new world. The strange, six-horned Euanthidarium and its relatives, the Brontotheres, and the brutish, carnivorous creodonts, all creatures of the ancient jungle, could not adapt to the new, tougher food sources and the more open landscapes. They faded into extinction, a failed first draft of the Age of Mammals. Their place was taken by the new, more modern mammals that had been living in their shadows. For these creatures, the new world of open grasslands was a world of incredible opportunity, and they adapted to it with spectacular success. The age of the archaic beasts was over. The age of the true mammals had begun. Among the herbivores, this was the beginning of the great age of the grazers. The horses, which had been small, cat-sized, forest-dwelling browsers, now began to adapt to a life on the plains. A creature like Mesohippus was larger than its ancestors. Its legs were longer and more slender for running, and it was losing its side toes, concentrating its weight on a single, central toe that would one day become a hoof. Most importantly, its teeth were changing, becoming taller and more robust, with thicker layers of enamel. The first steps towards the high-crowned, grinding teeth needed to cope with a lifetime of eating tough, abrasive grass. The rhinos also flourished in this new world, diversifying into a host of new forms, from small, running rhinos to the largest land mammal of all time, the colossal, hornless Parasatherium, a giraffe-like behemoth that browsed on the tops of the trees in the open woodlands of Asia. The first true camels and deer appeared, also adapting to the new open habitats, and in North America, the landscape was dominated by a strange and incredibly successful group of herbivores called the Oreodonts. A creature like Mericoidodon looked something like a sheep or a pig, and vast, sheep-like herds of these animals roamed the new savannas in their millions, becoming the primary food source for a new generation of predators. And these new predators were the true carnivorans. With the old creodonts gone, the ancestors of our modern cats and dogs rose to prominence. They were faster, more agile, and more intelligent hunters, perfectly suited for chasing down prey in the open. There were the first amphicyonids, the bear dogs, large, powerful predators that combined the traits of both groups. And there were the first nimrovids, the false saber-toothed cats. A creature like Hoplophonis was a sleek and powerful ambush predator with a pair of long, flattened, saber-like canine teeth, a stunning example of convergent evolution with the true saber-toothed cats that would evolve millions of years later. This was the new world of the Oligocene, a world that was, for the first time, truly modern in its field. It was a world of vast, open spaces, of sweeping grasslands, rustling in the wind. It was a world of great, migratory herds of grazing animals, of horses, rhinos, and orodonts, and it was a world of swift, intelligent, and pack-hunting predators. The strange, alien, jungle world of the early Cenozoic was gone, replaced by a cooler, drier, and more familiar landscape. The great cooling event that marked the end of the Eocene was a profound and permanent resetting of the planet's thermostat. The Earth had entered the icehouse state that it has remained in, with some fluctuations, to this very day. This new, colder, and more open world would set the stage for the next great chapter of mammalian evolution, an age where the grasslands would continue to expand, where the grazers and the predators would become even more specialized, and where our own primate ancestors, driven from the shrinking forests, would take their first, hesitant steps out onto the open plains. Our journey now carries us into the Miocene epoch, a vast and transformative period that began around 23 million years ago. The world we enter is one that is becoming ever more familiar, yet it is still a place of profound and ancient wonder. The continents have drifted into almost their modern positions, and the great icehouse climate, born from the freezing of Antarctica, continues to shape the planet. The defining feature of this new age is the continued expansion of a single, humble, yet revolutionary type of plant, grass. Imagine standing on a great plain in the heart of Miocene North America. The horizon is a vast, unbroken line, stretching for an impossible distance under a wide open sky. The dense, humid jungles of the Eocene are a distant memory, replaced by an endless rolling sea of grass, punctuated by scattered hardy trees. The air is drier, the sunlight more direct, and the world is filled with the constant, whispering sound of the wind, moving through millions of acres of tough, resilient vegetation. This new habitat, the savanna and the prairie, was the great evolutionary crucible of the Miocene. Life in the open, with few places to hide, was a life of exposure and of immense distances. It demanded new adaptations, new ways of moving, new ways of feeding, and new ways of surviving. And it was in this great, open-air arena that the next great evolutionary arms race between herbivores and predators would unfold. The grazer's gauntlet. Life as a grazer on the open plains was a life of constant vigilance and incredible physical demands. Grass, unlike the soft leaves of the forest, is a difficult food source. It is tough, fibrous, and most critically, it is filled with tiny, abrasive silica particles called phytoliths, the very same material that makes up sand. For a herbivore, a lifetime of chewing grass is like a lifetime of chewing sandpaper. It grinds down and destroys teeth with brutal efficiency. To survive in this new world, the herbivores had to evolve a whole new set of dental and digestive tools. The horses are the perfect example of this transformation. Their small, fox-sized ancestors from the Eocene, with their simple, low-crowned teeth, were browsers, ill-suited for a grassy diet. But in the Miocene, a new kind of horse, like the magnificent Merychippus, appeared. Its teeth were a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. They were hypsodont, or high-crowned, meaning the tooth was incredibly tall, with most of its length held in reserve within the jaw. As the grinding surface was worn away by the abrasive grass, the tooth would continue to erupt from the jaw, providing a fresh grinding surface, a process that would continue for the animal's entire life. Their legs also transformed. To run from the new fast predators of the open plains, they evolved longer limbs, and their side toes, once useful for navigating a soft forest floor, were now reduced to small useless splints. They began to stand and run on the tip of a single central toe, which was encased in a thick, hard hoof, a perfect adaptation for speed and endurance on the hard, dry ground of the prairie. This same story of adaptation was repeated across a host of other herbivorous lineages. The artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates, perfected their multi-chambered, ruminating stomachs, which allowed them to efficiently extract every last bit of nutrition from the poor-quality grass. The first true camels, antelopes, and giraffes spread across the plains of Africa, Eurasia, and North America. They shared this world with other, stranger herbivores. There were the chalicotheres, like the bizarre Chalicotherium, a large horse-like animal that instead of hooves, possessed long, sharp claws on its front feet. It walked on its knuckles, like a modern gorilla, and likely used its strange claws to hook and pull down high branches, to browse on leaves. And then there were the entelodonts, the so-called hell pigs. A creature like Daeodon was a terrifying beast, as large as a bison, with a massive pig-like head, powerful jaws, and flanged cheekbones. It was an opportunistic omnivore, likely using its immense power to both hunt and to intimidate other predators away from their kills. And to hunt these new, fast-running, and often herd-dwelling herbivores, a new generation of sophisticated predators evolved. The old, brutish creodonts were now long extinct, replaced by the true carnivorans. There were the amphicyonids, the great bear dogs, like the formidable amphicyone itself, a massive predator that combined the power of a bear with the running ability of a dog. And on the plains, the first true saber-toothed cats rose to prominence. A cat like Macarotis was a powerful ambush predator, its long, flattened, blade-like canine teeth, a perfect tool for delivering a single, devastating killing bite to the throat of a young horse or camel. The Miocene was a world of swift runners and powerful killers, a dynamic and brutal arms race played out across the vast open grasslands of the world. The ape's dilemma. While the grazers and their predators were perfecting a life on the plains, our own ancestors, the primates, were facing a profound crisis. The great global cooling that had begun at the end of the Eocene had caused the vast, tropical rainforests to shrink and fragment. The world of the apes, the world of the treetop canopy, was disappearing. The Miocene was the golden age of the apes, a time when they were far more diverse and widespread than they are today, with dozens of species living in the forests of Africa, Europe, and Asia. We know of creatures like Proconsul, an early ape from Africa that still moved through the trees on all fours like a monkey, and we know of a host of other, more advanced forms that were beginning to adapt to a life spent both in the trees and on the ground. But as their forest homes shrank, these apes were faced with a great evolutionary crossroads. One path was to retreat with the forests, to become specialists of the shrinking woodland habitats. This was the path taken by the ancestors of our modern orangutans in Asia and the ancestors of the gorillas and chimpanzees in Africa. The other path was a far more dangerous and uncertain one. It was to leave the relative safety of the trees and venture out into the new, open, and dangerous world of the savanna. This was the path that would eventually lead to us. The challenges of this new world were immense. On the savanna, there were few trees to escape into, and our ancestors would have been slow, clumsy, and vulnerable in the open, easy prey for the new, fast-running saber-toothed cats and bear dogs. But the opportunities were also great. The savanna offered new food sources like roots, tubers, and the carcasses left behind by the great predators. To exploit these resources, a new way of moving and a new way of being was required. It was at the very end of this long Miocene epoch that we find the first tantalizing evidence of the most important adaptation in our own lineage's history. From fossils found in the ancient soils of Africa, fossils like the skull of Sahelanthropus from Chad or the femur of Orrerin from Kenya, we see the first faint hints of bipedalism, the ability to walk upright on two legs. The evidence is fragmentary, a partial skull, a single leg bone, but it suggests that around 6 to 7 million years ago, a group of African apes had begun to experiment with a new form of locomotion. Why did we stand up? Perhaps it was to see over the tall savanna grass, to spot predators or find food from a distance. Perhaps it was to free the hands, to allow our ancestors to carry food back to a home base, or to carry simple tools. Or perhaps it was simply a more energy-efficient way to travel long distances between scattered patches of woodland. Whatever the reason, this single, momentous shift was the first step on the road to becoming human. It was a humble and hesitant step, taken by a small and vulnerable ape on the edge of a shrinking forest, in a world that was growing colder and drier. The world of the Miocene was a world in transition, a world where the ancient jungles gave way to the modern grasslands, a world that created the great grazing herds and the swift predators that we know today. And it was this same world that presented our own ancestors with a terrible choice: adapt or die. In taking that first clumsy step out onto the open plain, they chose to adapt, and in doing so, they set in motion the next great chapter of life's story, a world on the brink of ice. Our journey now carries us into the Pliocene epoch, which began around 5.3 million years ago. The world we enter is one that is teetering on the edge of a great and final climatic shift. The cooling and drying trend that began in the Oligocene has continued, and the continents have nearly completed their long journey to their modern positions. A single crucial geological event during this time would act as the final trigger for the coming ice. The Isthmus of Panama, the thin land bridge connecting North and South America, rose from the sea. This seemingly small event had a profound and planet-altering effect on the circulation of the world's oceans. It shut down the flow of warm, tropical water between the Atlantic and the Pacific. This rerouted ocean currents on a global scale, pushing more warm, salty water northwards into the North Atlantic. This warm water evaporated, creating more moisture in the atmosphere, which then fell as immense amounts of snow over the northern continents. Year after year, the snow accumulated, compressing into vast sheets of ice. The ice ages were about to begin. But before the ice took hold, the Pliocene was the final, golden age of the global savanna fauna. The grasslands and open woodlands that had been born in the Oligocene now reached their maximum extent, creating a world of incredible biodiversity, a world of giants that rivaled, and in some cases, even surpassed, those of today. The savanna's golden age, the great grazing herds of the Pliocene, were a spectacle of immense scale and diversity. This was the world of the true megafauna, the perfection of the horse lineage, which had been adapting to a life of grazing for millions of years, now produced the first truly modern single-toed horses, like Pliohippus. They were fast, efficient runners, their high-crowned teeth perfectly suited for a lifetime of grinding tough, abrasive grass. The rise of the elephants, the ancestors of our modern elephants, the proboscideans, diversified into a host of spectacular forms. In the savannas of Africa and Eurasia, there were giants like Dinotherium, an immense beast with strange, downward curving tusks on its lower jaw, which it may have used to strip bark from trees. The Great American Biotic Interchange. With the formation of the Isthmus of Panama, a great migration began. Animals from North America, like horses, camels, and saber-toothed cats, moved south, and from the south, a host of strange and unique creatures, which had evolved in isolation for millions of years, moved north. Among them were the colossal giant ground sloths, like the mighty megatherium, a creature as large as an elephant that could stand on its hind legs to browse on trees. And there were the glyptodonts, car-sized relatives of armadillos, covered in a solid dome-like shell of bony armor. To hunt these magnificent herbivores, the predators had also reached a new peak of sophistication. The great saber-toothed cats were now the undisputed kings of the ambush. A cat like Smilodon was a powerhouse of a predator. It was not a fast runner, but was built with the immense, muscular power of a bear. It would have used its strength to wrestle its large, thick-skinned prey to the ground before delivering a single, precise, and fatal bite with its colossal, 7-inch-long canine teeth. The open plains were also patrolled by swift, pack-hunting dire wolves and giant, bone-crushing hyenas. The rise of the southern apes, and it was into this vibrant, beautiful, and incredibly dangerous world that our own ancestors now fully emerged. This was the age of the Australopithecines, the southern apes. For several million years, these remarkable creatures thrived in the savannas and open woodlands of Africa. They were a diverse group, not a single species, but a whole family of bipedal apes, our closest and most well-known ancient relatives. The most famous of all is a single partial skeleton discovered in the Afar region of Ethiopia in 1974. Her discoverers named her Lucy. She belonged to the species Australopithecus afarensis, and she lived around 3.2 million years ago. Her skeleton is one of the most important fossils ever found because it provides undeniable proof that our ancestors were walking upright on two legs long before they developed large brains or made stone tools. Lucy's anatomy is a beautiful mosaic of ancient and modern traits. Her pelvis is short and bowl-shaped, like a human's, a clear adaptation for balancing the torso during bipedal walking. Her knee joint and the angle of her femur show that she could lock her legs straight, allowing her to stand and walk with an efficient, striding gait. But her arms were still long and powerful, and her finger and toe bones were curved, like those of a chimpanzee. This tells us that she was still an adept and powerful climber. Lucy and her kind lived a life of duality, a life spent both walking on the ground during the day to forage for food, and likely retreating to the safety of the trees at night to sleep, away from the saber-toothed cats and hyenas that prowled the darkness. And we know she was not alone. In Latoli, Tanzania, another discovery of breathtaking significance was made, preserved in a layer of ancient, hardened volcanic ash. A set of footprints was found, dating back 3.6 million years. These were the Latoli footprints. They show 2, perhaps 3, of our Australopithecus afarensis ancestors walking together across a damp, ashen plain. Their prints are unmistakably human-like, with a clear arch and a forward-pointing big toe. It is a single, frozen moment in time, a poignant and powerful testament to our deep past, a record of our ancestors walking together across a long-vanished world. This successful group of upright apes diversified into many forms. There were the gracile forms, like Lucy, and there were the robust forms, like Paranthropus, which had enormous dish-shaped faces, immense molar teeth, and a great, bony crest on the top of their skulls, for anchoring massive chewing muscles, adaptations for a diet of tough, fibrous, low-quality vegetation. And at some point during this time, a new and revolutionary behavior appeared. Around 3.3 million years ago, we find the first, simple stone tools. These are not the sophisticated hand axes of later humans, but simple, battered cobbles and sharp-edged flakes, used for cracking open nuts or stripping meat from bones. This was the dawn of technology, the first, faint glimmer of the ingenuity that would one day define our lineage. The world plunges into ice. As the Pliocene drew to a close, the global cooling trend that had been building for millions of years finally reached its tipping point. Around 2.6 million years ago, the great ice ages of the Pleistocene epoch began. The vast ice sheets that had already formed on Antarctica now began to grow in the northern hemisphere as well. Colossal glaciers, the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets in North America, and the Scandinavian ice sheet in Europe began to advance southwards, grinding and scouring the land, their immense weight depressing the Earth's crust beneath them. This was not a single, continuous winter. The Pleistocene was a dramatic and unstable time of oscillating climates, of long, cold glacial periods where the ice sheets would advance, and shorter, warmer, interglacial periods where they would retreat. We are living in one of those warm, interglacial periods right now. But for much of the last 2.5 million years, the Earth has been a much colder place. This new, challenging world of ice and stone would be the final crucible, the ultimate test for our own bipedal, tool-making ancestors. A new, more intelligent, and more adaptable kind of hominin was about to emerge on the cold savannas of Africa, a creature that would learn to master fire, to create more sophisticated tools, and to begin a journey that would eventually take it out of its African homeland and across the entire globe. An age of ice and stone. Our journey now carries us into the Pleistocene epoch, an age that began around 2.6 million years ago. The world we enter is one of profound and dramatic instability. The long, slow cooling trend that had been building for tens of millions of years had finally reached its tipping point. The great ice sheets, which had long been confined to Antarctica, now began to grow in the northern hemisphere. This was the dawn of the great ice ages. It's important to understand that this was not a single, continuous winter. The Pleistocene was an age of rhythm, a great planetary pulse of cold and warmth, driven by subtle, predictable wobbles in the Earth's orbit around the Sun, known as Milankovitch cycles. For long periods, lasting perhaps 100,000 years, the Earth would be plunged into a deep glacial maximum. Colossal ice sheets, the Laurentide in North America and the Scandinavian in Europe, kilometers thick, would grow and grind their way south, scouring the land and locking up so much of the world's water that global sea levels would fall by over 100 meters. This exposed vast new areas of land, creating land bridges, like the one that would connect Siberia and Alaska, allowing animals, and eventually, people, to walk between continents. Then, for shorter periods, lasting 10 or 20,000 years, the planet would rapidly warm, entering an interglacial period, like the one we are living in today. The great ice sheets would retreat, sea levels would rise, and forests would return to the high latitudes. The Pleistocene was a relentless cycle of these two extremes, a world of constant, dramatic, and often violent change. And it was this very instability, this constant challenge, that would become the primary engine of our own evolution. The dawn of ingenuity, Homo habilis. In the open woodlands and savannas of Africa, the Australopithecines, who had thrived for millions of years, were now facing the pressures of this new fluctuating world. The climate was becoming even more unpredictable, and the ability to adapt, to think, and to solve problems was now more important than ever before. It was in this environment, around 2.4 million years ago, that a new kind of hominin emerged from the Australopithecine lineage. We call this creature Homo habilis, the handyman. Homo habilis was still, in many ways, very ape-like. It had long arms and a projecting lower face, but its brain was significantly larger than that of Lucy and her kin, and its teeth were smaller and more delicate. But its most important and defining feature was not in its body, but in its behavior. Homo habilis was the first of our ancestors to consistently and systematically create and use stone tools. This was not just the simple act of using a rock to smash a nut. This was a true technology. It involved selecting the right kind of stone, understanding its fracture properties, and using another stone, a hammer stone, to strike it at the perfect angle to shear off a sharp-edged flake. These simple tools, the choppers and flakes of the Oldowan tradition, were a revolutionary invention. They were, in a very real sense, an externalization of evolution. A creature that could not evolve sharp claws or powerful canine teeth could now, with a few moments of clever work, create a cutting edge sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. These tools were a portable butcher's kit. They allowed Homo habilis to slice through tough hides and cut meat from the bones of carcasses left behind by the great saber-toothed cats, giving them access to a new incredibly rich source of calories and protein that would in turn fuel the growth of an even larger and more energy-hungry brain. This was the dawn of ingenuity, the first faint glimmer of the technological prowess that would one day define our species. The journeyman, Homo erectus, and the conquest of the planet Wood. The constant pressure of the fluctuating Ice Age climate continued to drive our lineage's evolution. Around 1.9 million years ago, a new and profoundly different kind of human appeared on the African savanna. This was Homo erectus, the upright man, and with its appearance, the story of human evolution truly accelerates. Homo erectus was a revolutionary creature. Its body was tall, slender, and almost identical in its proportions to our own. The long arms of its ancestors were gone, replaced by long, powerful legs, perfectly adapted for striding, and crucially, for long-distance running. Its brain was far larger than that of Homo habilis, and its face was more human-like, with a smaller jaw and a projecting nose for cooling and moistening the dry savanna air. The famous Turkana boy skeleton, a nearly complete fossil of a young Homo erectus from Kenya, shows a creature that was, from the neck down, almost indistinguishable from a modern human. And with this new body came two new and world-altering technologies. The first was a more sophisticated toolkit. Homo erectus created the iconic tool of the early Stone Age, the Acheulean hand axe. Unlike the simple Oldowan choppers, a hand axe was a complex and symmetrical object, a beautiful, teardrop-shaped tool that was worked on both sides. To create one required skill, patience, and most importantly, the ability to hold a complex, three-dimensional design in one's mind, and then impose that design upon a block of stone. It was a sign of a new and more advanced cognitive world. The second, and even more profound, of their innovations was the mastery of fire. While earlier hominins may have used fire opportunistically. Homo erectus was the first to truly control it. The evidence is ancient, but clear. Hearths, burned bones, and fire-hardened tools begin to appear in the archaeological record. The mastery of fire was perhaps the single most important step in our journey to becoming human. It provided warmth in the cold nights of the Ice Age. It provided a powerful defense against the great predators of the Pleistocene. It transformed the night from a time of terror into a time of social gathering, a time for sharing food and stories around the flickering light of a hearth. And most importantly, it allowed our ancestors to cook their food. Cooking meat and tubers makes them easier to digest and unlocks far more calories and nutrients, which in turn would have fueled the continued expansion of the energy-hungry human brain. Armed with these new tools, a more adaptable body, and the power of fire, Homo erectus did something no hominin had ever done before. It walked out of Africa. For the first time, our ancestors began to spread across the entire Old World. They moved into the Middle East, across the plains of Asia, where they are known as Peking Man and Java Man, and into the challenging temperate woodlands of Europe. This was the first great human migration, a testament to the incredible adaptability of this new kind of human, an ancestor who was no longer just a clever African ape, but a true world-traveling journeyman. And everywhere they went, they carried with them their fire and their stone hand axes, the twin symbols of their ingenuity and their resilience in the face of the relentless challenges of the Ice Age world. We have now arrived in a world defined by the relentless pulse of the great ice ages. The warm, stable jungle that once covered the planet is a distant memory, replaced by a new challenging world of vast, open savannas and advancing glaciers. It was this very world of constant climatic instability that acted as the final crucible for our own lineage, forging a new and more resourceful kind of hominin. We will now explore this world of ice and stone to meet the most famous of our extinct relatives, the Neanderthals, and to witness the dawn of our own species, Homo sapiens, as the modern human mind finally awakens on the vast and ancient plains of Africa. The world of the Middle Pleistocene, which began around 780,000 years ago, was a world in the grip of the most intense glacial cycles of the last 66 million years. The slow, predictable wobbles in the Earth's orbit around the Sun now conspired to create long and punishing ice ages, punctuated by brief, warm interglacial periods. During a glacial maximum, the planet was a profoundly different place. Colossal ice sheets, kilometers thick, smothered the northern continents. The Laurentide ice sheet covered all of modern-day Canada and stretched south to where New York City now stands. In Europe, the Scandinavian ice sheet covered the British Isles and all of northern Europe. So much of the world's water was locked up in these glaciers that global sea levels fell by over 120 meters, creating vast land bridges and altering the shape of the continents. The world beyond the ice was a cold, dry and windswept place, a vast, treeless biome known as the Mammoth Steppe, which stretched from Western Europe all the way across Asia to North America. It was in this challenging and unforgiving world that the descendants of Homo erectus continued to evolve in Europe and the Middle East. A new and highly specialized kind of human emerged, a creature perfectly and beautifully adapted to a life in the cold. These were the Neanderthals, the children of the ice. A world of the Neanderthals. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Neanderthals were the undisputed masters of Ice Age Europe. Their very bodies were a testament to their adaptation to a cold and brutal environment. They were shorter and far more robustly built than modern humans, with wide, barrel-shaped chests and short, powerful limbs, a body plan that conserved heat with incredible efficiency. Their bones were incredibly thick, and their bodies were powerfully muscled, the skeletons of natural powerlifters, a physique necessary for a life of close-quarters hunting of giant and dangerous Ice Age beasts. Their skulls were also distinct, long and low, with a prominent brow ridge and a large projecting nose that was likely filled with a complex network of blood vessels, a biological radiator designed to warm and moisten the frigid, dry air of the Ice Age before it reached their lungs. And within that long skull was a brain that was on average even larger than our own. The Neanderthals were not the brutish, hunched-over cavemen of old cartoons. They were a different, highly intelligent, and incredibly successful form of humanity. Their intelligence is written in the stone tools they left behind. The Neanderthals were masters of a sophisticated tool-making technology known as the Mousterian tradition. This was a significant leap beyond the simple hand axes of their ancestors. It involved a complex and abstract process of preparing a core of flint, carefully shaping it before striking off a final, perfectly formed flake that would be used as a spear point or a cutting tool. This technique, known as the levelos technique, required foresight, planning, and a deep understanding of the properties of stone. They were also formidable hunters. Isotopic analysis of their bones shows that they were top-level carnivores, their diet consisting almost entirely of the meat of the great megafauna of the Ice Age. They hunted woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant cave bears, and vast herds of bison and reindeer. And because their tools were designed for thrusting, not throwing, they had to hunt these immense and dangerous animals up close, a life of incredible bravery and constant, brutal physical risk. But perhaps the most profound evidence of their humanity is found in the way they lived and the way they died. We have found the fossilized remains of old Neanderthals, individuals who had suffered debilitating injuries like withered arms or crippling arthritis, yet who lived on for years, long after they would have been able to fend for themselves. This is a clear and poignant sign that they were cared for by their social group, that they were looked after and fed, a testament to a deep and powerful sense of empathy and community. And we know that they buried their dead in caves across Europe and the Middle East. We have found Neanderthal skeletons that were deliberately and carefully placed in graves, some in a sleeping posture, some accompanied by simple grave goods like stone tools or animal bones. This act of intentional burial suggests something more than just the disposal of a body. It suggests ritual, it suggests grief, and it suggests the first faint glimmerings of a spiritual or symbolic thought, a recognition that death was a profound and significant event. They were not just intelligent animals, they were a people with a rich and complex culture of their own. The African Genesis, the dawn of Homo sapiens. While the Neanderthals were reigning in the cold north, a different story was unfolding on the continent where our journey began, Africa. In the vast and fluctuating savannas of their ancestral homeland, a new kind of human was emerging from the lineage of Homo heidelbergensis. This was us, anatomically modern Homo sapiens, the earliest fossils of our own species, from sites like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, date back to around 300,000 years ago. These early humans had the high, rounded skull, the small, flat face, and the prominent chin that defines our own anatomy. But for a long time, their behavior remained much the same as their ancestors. Then, beginning around 100,000 years ago, something new and revolutionary began to appear in the African archaeological record. This was the dawn of behavioral modernity. We see the creation of new and more sophisticated stone tools, long, slender blades that were more efficient and versatile than anything that had come before. We see the first evidence of long-distance trade, with seashells being transported for hundreds of kilometers inland. And most importantly, we see the first, undeniable evidence of art and symbolic thought. In caves like Blombos in South Africa, our ancestors began to engrave abstract, geometric patterns onto pieces of red ochre. They began to drill holes in small seashells, stringing them together to create the world's first jewelry, the first personal ornaments. This was not just a technological revolution, it was a cognitive one. It was the birth of the modern human mind, a mind that was not just concerned with the practicalities of survival, but was now capable of abstract thought, of creating and sharing symbols, and of building a complex cultural world. This new cognitive toolkit, likely facilitated by the full development of complex grammatical language, was our species' greatest weapon, the key to our eventual and total conquest of the planet. And around 60,000 years ago, armed with this new and powerful mind, our ancestors began their final and successful great migration out of Africa. They spread, first, into the Middle East, and then across Asia and into Europe. And in Europe, for the first time in history, they came face to face with another, different kind of intelligent, tool-making, fire-wielding human. They met the Neanderthals, the great encounter and a lingering mystery. For perhaps 10,000 years, these two great human lineages, the children of the ice and the children of the sun, shared the continent of Europe. What was this encounter like? The evidence is sparse, but tantalizing. We know that they lived in the same landscapes, hunted the same animals, and sometimes even used the same caves, though perhaps at different times. But the most profound evidence of their interaction is written in our own DNA. Genetic analysis has revealed that all modern humans of non-African descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. This is undeniable proof that our ancestors and the Neanderthals met, and that they interbred. We are, in a small but significant way, their living descendants. But this encounter also marks the beginning of the Neanderthals' end. Around 40,000 years ago, after a reign of nearly 500,000 years, they vanished from the fossil record. Why they disappeared, while we survived, is one of the greatest mysteries in human evolution. It was likely not a single simple event, but a complex combination of factors. The climate of the last ice age was becoming even more unstable, and the more adaptable, technologically innovative Homo sapiens, with their wider social networks, may have been better equipped to handle the changes, or perhaps our ancestors, with a higher birth rate and a more efficient way of life, simply outcompeted their cousins for the scarce resources of Ice Age Europe. Or it may be that they were not so much extinguished as they were absorbed, their small populations slowly interbreeding with the larger, incoming populations of modern humans, until they faded into our own lineage. Whatever the cause, by 40,000 years ago, our species was now the last human on Earth. But in Nenet's time, the world of ice in mind, the Middle Pleistocene, which began around 780,000 years ago, was the true heart of the Ice Age. The climatic oscillations between long, deep glacials and shorter, warm interglacials became more extreme and more pronounced. During a glacial maximum, the world was a truly formidable place. Great, continental ice sheets, in some places, over 3 kilometers thick, smothered the northern hemisphere. The sheer weight of this ice was so immense that it depressed the Earth's crust beneath it by hundreds of meters. So much of the world's water was locked up in these colossal glaciers that global sea levels fell dramatically, exposing vast new coastlines and creating land bridges that connected lands we now know as separate. The world beyond the ice was a cold, dry, and relentlessly windy place. The great forests retreated into sheltered southern refuges, replaced by a vast treeless biome known as the Mammoth Steppe, an endless, grassy plain that stretched from Western Europe across the whole of Asia and over the Bering Land Bridge into North America. It was in this harsh and unforgiving world that the descendants of Homo erectus continued to evolve. In Africa, they took one path, and in the cold north of Europe and Asia, they took another. This northern lineage, forged in the crucible of the ice, would become a new and highly specialized kind of human, a creature perfectly and beautifully adapted to a life of survival at the frozen edge of the world. These were the Neanderthals, the children of the ice, a world of the Neanderthals. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, were the undisputed masters of Ice Age Eurasia. Their very bodies are a testament to their profound adaptation to a cold and brutal environment. They were shorter and far more robustly built than modern humans, with wide, barrel-shaped chests and short, powerful limbs, a body plan that conserved heat with incredible efficiency. Their bones were incredibly thick, their bodies powerfully muscled, the skeletons of natural powerlifters, a physique necessary for a life of close-quarters hunting of giant and dangerous Ice Age beasts. Their skulls were also distinct, long and low, with a prominent brow ridge and a large projecting nose that was likely filled with a complex network of blood vessels, a biological radiator designed to warm and moisten the frigid, dry air of the Ice Age before it reached their lungs. And within that long skull was a brain that was, on average, even larger than our own. The Neanderthals were not the brutish, hunched-over cavemen of old cartoons. They were a different, highly intelligent, and incredibly successful form of humanity. Their intelligence is written in the stone tools they left behind. The Neanderthals were masters of a sophisticated tool-making technology known as the Mousterian tradition. This was a significant leap beyond the simple hand axes of their ancestors. It involved a complex and abstract process of preparing a core of flint, carefully shaping it before striking off a final, perfectly formed flake that would be used as a spear point or a cutting tool. This technique, known as the levelos technique, required foresight, planning, and a deep understanding of the properties of stone. They were also formidable hunters. Isotopic analysis of their bones shows that they were top-level carnivores, their diet consisting almost entirely of the meat of the great megafauna of the Ice Age. They hunted woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant cave bears, and vast herds of bison and reindeer. And because their tools were designed for thrusting, not throwing, they had to hunt these immense and dangerous animals up close. A life of incredible bravery and constant, brutal physical risk. But perhaps the most profound evidence of their humanity is found in the way they lived and the way they died. We have found the fossilized remains of old Neanderthals, individuals who had suffered debilitating injuries like withered arms or crippling arthritis, yet who lived on for years, long after they would have been able to fend for themselves. This is a clear and poignant sign that they were cared for by their social group, that they were looked after and fed, a testament to a deep and powerful sense of empathy and community. And we know that they buried their dead. In caves across Europe and the Middle East, we have found Neanderthal skeletons that were deliberately and carefully placed in graves, some in a sleeping posture, some accompanied by simple grave goods like stone tools or animal bones. This act of intentional burial suggests something more than just the disposal of a body. It suggests ritual, it suggests grief, and it suggests the first, faint glimmerings of a spiritual or symbolic thought, a recognition that death was a profound and significant event. They were not just intelligent animals, they were a people with a rich and complex culture of their own. The African Genesis, the dawn of Homo sapiens. While the Neanderthals were reigning in the cold north, a different story was unfolding on the continent where our journey began, Africa. In the vast and fluctuating savannas of their ancestral homeland, a new kind of human was emerging from the lineage of Homo heidelbergensis. This was us, anatomically modern Homo sapiens, the earliest fossils of our own species, from sites like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, date back to around 300,000 years ago. These early humans had the high, rounded skull, the small, flat face, and the prominent chin that defines our own anatomy. But for a long time, their behavior remained much the same as their ancestors. Then beginning, around 100,000 years ago, something new and revolutionary began to appear in the African archaeological record. This was the dawn of behavioral modernity. We see the creation of new and more sophisticated stone tools, long, slender blades that were more efficient and versatile than anything that had come before. We see the first evidence of long-distance trade, with seashells being transported for hundreds of kilometers inland. And most importantly, we see the first, undeniable evidence of art and symbolic thought. In caves like Blombos in South Africa, our ancestors began to engrave abstract, geometric patterns onto pieces of red ochre. They began to drill holes in small seashells, stringing them together to create the world's first jewelry, the first personal ornaments. This was not just a technological revolution. It was a cognitive one. It was the birth of the modern human mind, a mind that was not just concerned with the practicalities of survival, but was now capable of abstract thought, of creating and sharing symbols, and of building a complex cultural world. This new cognitive toolkit, likely facilitated by the full development of complex grammatical language, was our species' greatest weapon the key to our eventual and total conquest of the planet. And around 60,000 years ago, armed with this new and powerful mind, our ancestors began their final and successful great migration out of Africa. They spread first into the Middle East, and then across Asia and into Europe. And in Europe, for the first time in history, they came face to face with another, different kind of intelligent, tool-making, fire-wielding human. They met the Neanderthals, the great encounter, and a lingering mystery. For perhaps 10,000 years, these two great human lineages, the children of the ice and the children of the sun, shared the continent of Europe. What was this encounter like? The evidence is sparse, but tantalizing. We know that they lived in the same landscapes, hunted the same animals, and sometimes even used the same caves, though perhaps at different times. But the most profound evidence of their interaction is written in our own DNA. Genetic analysis has revealed that all modern humans of non-African descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. This is undeniable proof that our ancestors and the Neanderthals met and that they interbred. We are, in a small but significant way, their living descendants. But this encounter also marks the beginning of the Neanderthals' end. Around 40,000 years ago, after a reign of nearly 500,000 years, they vanished from the fossil record. Why they disappeared while we survived is one of the greatest mysteries in human evolution. It was likely not a single, simple event, but a complex combination of factors. The climate of the last ice age was becoming even more unstable, and the more adaptable, technologically innovative Homo sapiens, with their wider social networks, may have been better equipped to handle the changes. Or perhaps our ancestors, with a higher birth rate and a more efficient way of life, simply outcompeted their cousins for the scarce resources of Ice Age Europe. Or it may be that they were not so much extinguished as they were absorbed, their small populations slowly interbreeding with the larger incoming populations of modern humans until they faded into our own lineage. Whatever the cause, by 40,000 years ago, our species was now the last human on Earth. The cathedrals of the Ice Age. The world we now enter is the world of the last glacial maximum, the peak of the last great ice age, which occurred around 20,000 years ago. It is a world of almost unimaginable cold and ice. Colossal glaciers, kilometers thick, now cover the northern continents at their greatest extent. The Great Laurentide ice sheet smothers all of what is now Canada and the northern United States. The Scandinavian ice sheet covers all of northern Europe. The air is brutally cold, dry, and filled with a constant, scouring wind that picks up dust from the vast barren plains left behind by the retreating glaciers. This is the world of the mammoth steppe, a cold, windswept, and treeless grassland that stretches from the shores of the Atlantic in France, all the way across Eurasia, and over the vast exposed land bridge of Beringia into North America. It was in this incredibly challenging and unforgiving environment that our own ancestors, the modern humans who had recently arrived in Europe, did something that no creature on Earth had ever done before. They began to create art. This was not the simple, abstract scratching of their African ancestors. This was the beginning of a true artistic and symbolic explosion, a revolution of the mind. The cathedrals of the Ice Age. Deep within the limestone caves of what are now France and Spain, these Ice Age hunters, the people of the Upper Paleolithic, began to create some of the most beautiful, powerful, and mysterious art in the entire history of humanity. Let us imagine journeying with them. We leave the cold, bright, windswept world of the steppe and enter the absolute darkness and silence of a deep cave with only the flickering, sputtering light of a lamp burning animal fat. We move deeper and deeper into the earth, through narrow passages and into great, vaulted chambers. And here, on the walls of these deep sacred spaces, the world of the Ice Age is brought to life, using charcoal from burned wood for their black lines, and rich, ground-up mineral pigments, the red and yellow ochres, for their colors. They painted a magnificent and vibrant menagerie of the great beasts they shared the world with. There are great, galloping herds of wild horses, powerful, shaggy-maned cave lions, woolly rhinos with their heads lowered, as if to charge, and immense, majestic woolly mammoths, their curved tusks sweeping across the rock. The artists were masters of their craft. They used the natural, curving contours of the cave walls to give their paintings a stunning, three-dimensional quality, making the animals seem to bulge with muscle and life in the flickering lamplight. Why did they create this magnificent art in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the caves, in places they did not live? We will never know for sure, but it was clearly not for simple decoration. Perhaps it was a form of hunting magic, an attempt to capture the spirit of the animals they needed to hunt to survive. Perhaps these were sacred spaces, the first great cathedrals of humanity, where shamans would journey deep into the earth to connect with the spirit world. Or perhaps it was simply for storytelling, a way to record the great myths and histories of their people, a visual library in the heart of the earth. And their creativity was not confined to cave walls. They also created beautiful and intricate portable art. They carved exquisite, lifelike sculptures of animals from mammoth ivory and reindeer antler, and they sculpted the famous Venus figurines, small stylized statues of female figures which have been found from France to Siberia, a testament to a shared cultural and perhaps spiritual world that stretched across the entire continent. And we know they had music. From these same caves, archaeologists have found beautifully crafted flutes made from the hollow bones of vultures, instruments that, when played today, still produce clear, haunting, and beautiful notes. This was a world of art, of music, of ritual, and of profound symbolic thought. This was the true and final dawn of the human spirit, the final conquests. And armed with this new, creative, and cooperative mind, our ancestors now completed their conquest of the planet. Around 65,000 years ago, they had already accomplished one of the most remarkable feats of exploration in human history. Using simple rafts or canoes, they had crossed the open ocean to reach the continent of Australia, becoming the first humans to ever set foot on that new world. And now, at the height of the last glacial maximum, they embarked on their final, great migration. With so much of the world's water locked up in the great ice sheets, the sea level was low enough to expose a vast, cold, and dry land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska. This was Beringia, and sometime between 20 and 15,000 years ago, small groups of Ice Age hunters, following the great herds of mammoth, bison, and horses, walked across this land bridge and into the Americas. They were the first people to ever enter this new hemisphere. From there they spread south through an ice-free corridor that opened between the great glaciers and into the heart of a continent that was filled with its own magnificent megafauna and was, for a time, a true hunter's paradise. The Great Thaw and the Great Death. Then, beginning around 14,000 years ago, the world began to change, rapidly and dramatically. The great orbital cycles shifted, and the planet began to warm. The ice ages came to a sudden and violent end. The colossal ice sheets, which had dominated the northern hemisphere for 100,000 years, began to melt at a catastrophic rate. The meltwater created colossal, continent-sized glacial lakes, which would periodically burst through their ice dams, unleashing biblical-scale floods that scoured the landscape. Sea levels rose by over 100 meters, drowning the coastal plains and severing the land bridges, turning Britain into an island and closing the door to the Americas behind its first peoples. The cold, dry mammoth steppe was replaced by the temperate, wet, and dense forests and prairies that we know today. And in the wake of this great global thaw, one final, great extinction event took place. This was the Quaternary extinction event, the great death of the megafauna across the globe. But most dramatically, in the Americas, the great beasts of the Ice Age vanished forever. The woolly mammoth and the woolly rhino disappeared from the plains of Eurasia and North America. The great, shaggy cave bears and the fierce cave lions vanished from Europe. The iconic, saber-toothed cat, Smilodon, the great ambush hunter, disappeared from the Americas. The colossal giant ground sloths, the tank-like glyptodonts, and the Native American horses and camels all went extinct. Why did they die? The debate continues to this day. but it was likely a devastating 1-2 punch. The first blow was the rapid and extreme climate change. The habitats that these great animals were perfectly adapted to, the cold, dry mammoth steppe, disappeared in the space of just a few thousand years, replaced by dense forests that they could not navigate or feed in. But the second blow may have been us. This great extinction event coincides perfectly with the arrival and spread of a new, incredibly intelligent and deadly predator into these ecosystems, Homo sapiens. Armed with the sophisticated spear thrower, the atlatl, which allowed them to hunt from a safe distance, and working in large cooperative groups, our ancestors were formidable hunters. The great megafauna, which had never before faced a predator with such a deadly combination of intelligence and technology, may have been hunted to extinction. And so, the Pleistocene epoch ends not with a bang, but with a great and final silence. The world at the dawn of our own current epoch, the Holocene, 10,000 years ago, is a world that has been emptied. Once again, the great ice sheets are gone, and the magnificent megafauna, the mammoths, the saber-tooths, and the ground sloths are gone too. And on this new, warmer, and more stable planet, our own species, Homo sapiens, is now the undisputed and dominant large animal, the sole inheritor of a world that we had, perhaps, helped to empty. The iconic saber-toothed cat, Smilodon, the great ambush hunter, disappeared from the Americas. The colossal giant ground sloths, the tank-like glyptodonts, and the Native American horses and camels all went extinct. Why did they die? The debate continues to this day, but it was likely a devastating 1-2 punch. The first blow was the rapid and extreme climate change. The habitats that these great animals were perfectly adapted to, the cold, dry mammoth steppe, disappeared in the space of just a few thousand years, replaced by dense forests that they could not navigate or feed in. But the second blow may have been us. This great extinction event coincides perfectly with the arrival and spread of a new, incredibly intelligent and deadly predator into these ecosystems, Homo sapiens. Armed with the sophisticated spear thrower, the atlatl, which allowed them to hunt from a safe distance, and working in large cooperative groups, our ancestors were formidable hunters. The great megafauna, which had never before faced a predator with such a deadly combination of intelligence and technology, may have been hunted to extinction. And so, the Pleistocene epoch ends, not with a bang, but with a great and final silence. The world at the dawn of our own current epoch, the Holocene, 10,000 years ago, is a world that has been emptied once again. The great ice sheets are gone, and the magnificent megafauna, the mammoths, the saber-tooths, and the ground sloths are gone too. And on this new, warmer, and more stable planet, our own species, Homo sapiens, is now the undisputed and dominant large animal, the sole inheritor of a world that we had, perhaps, helped to empty. The invention of a new world. The world that dawned at the beginning of the Holocene epoch, around 11,700 years ago, was a world of incredible abundance and opportunity. The immense grinding ice sheets that had held the northern hemisphere in their grip for 100,000 years were in their final, catastrophic retreat. As they melted, they filled the great basins they had carved, creating the Great Lakes of North America and the Baltic Sea of Europe. The vast, cold, and dusty mammoth steppe was gone, replaced by the return of immense temperate forests of oak, birch, and pine that spread across the continents. Global sea levels, which had been dramatically lowered by the ice, now rose, flooding the continental shelves and creating the familiar coastlines that we know today. In this new, warmer, wetter, and more stable world, our ancestors, the last hunter-gatherers, flourished. For a few thousand years, they lived in a kind of paradise. The rivers were teeming with fish, the forests were filled with deer and wild boar, and the air was alive with vast flocks of birds. They lived in small nomadic bands, moving with the seasons, their lives governed by an incredibly deep and intimate knowledge of the natural world. For 99% of our species' history, this was our way of life. It was a successful, adaptable, and resilient culture that had allowed us to survive the worst of the ice ages and to populate every corner of the planet. there was no obvious reason to change. The seeds of change, the Neolithic Revolution. But around 12,000 years ago, in a region of the Middle East known as the Fertile Crescent, a slow and almost imperceptible revolution began. This was not a sudden invention, but a gradual, multi-generational process of profound transformation. The people of this region, the Natufians, began to experiment with a new way of life. They lived in a land that was particularly rich in resources, including vast, wild fields of the ancestors of modern wheat and barley, and herds of wild goats, sheep, and pigs. They began to settle down, building the first permanent villages of stone huts and harvesting these wild grains as a reliable food source. Over many centuries, a process of coevolution began. These early people would have naturally collected the seeds from the plants that were the most useful, those with the largest grains, or those whose seeds clung most tightly to the stalk instead of shattering on the ground. By preferentially harvesting these plants, and by spilling their seeds around their settlements, they were, unconsciously at first, acting as agents of natural selection. They were slowly, generation by generation, transforming these wild grasses into domesticated crops. At the same time, they began to manage the wild herds of goats and sheep, culling the aggressive individuals and protecting the more docile ones, slowly transforming these wild animals into domesticated livestock. This was the dawn of agriculture. This revolution did not happen just once. In a remarkable testament to human ingenuity, it was an idea that was independently invented in at least 7 different parts of the world, with different local plants and animals. In the Yangtze and Yellow River valleys of China, people began to cultivate wild rice and millet. In Mesoamerica, they domesticated maize, beans, and squash. In the Andes of South America, they cultivated potatoes and llamas. In sub-Saharan Africa, they domesticated sorghum and yams. This was the single most important transformation in the entire history of our species. The shift from a nomadic life of hunting and gathering to a settled life of farming would change our relationship with the planet and with each other forever. The consequences of the harvest, the agricultural revolution, was not an easy transition. Early farmers likely worked harder, had a less varied and less nutritious diet, and suffered from new diseases. But it had one profound and world-altering consequence. It allowed for the production of a surplus of food, and from this surplus, all the complexity of our modern world would grow. A stable and abundant food supply led to an unprecedented explosion in the human population. The small, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers were replaced by large, dense, and growing farming villages, and with this new settled way of life came a host of new technologies. People began to create pottery to store their surplus grain and water. They developed polished stone axes to clear the great forests for their fields, and they invented the loom to weave textiles from domesticated plant fibers and animal wool. But this new world also created new problems and new social structures. For the first time, the concept of property became central to human life. A hunter-gatherer owns only what they can carry. A farmer owns a field, a house, a harvest, and a herd. With property came the idea of wealth, of inheritance, and of inequality. And with dense, settled populations living in close and often unsanitary proximity to their domesticated animals, a new and terrible threat emerged. Infectious crowd diseases, pathogens that had once been confined to animals, now made the leap to humans, evolving into the devastating diseases of measles, smallpox, tuberculosis, and influenza that would plague human civilizations for millennia. The dawn of civilization. As villages grew larger and societies became more complex, a new form of social organization was required. And around 6,000 years ago, in the fertile river valleys of Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the first true cities were born. This was the beginning of the Sumerian civilization. Here, for the first time, we see the emergence of a centralized government with kings and a ruling class. We see the construction of monumental architecture, the great temple ziggurats, dedicated to a pantheon of gods and managed by a powerful priestly class. We see the formation of the first armies, the first systems of taxation, and the first complex, long-distance trade networks. And to manage the incredible complexity of this new urban world, to keep track of the tribute of grain in the temple storehouses, the Sumerians invented one final and most profound technology. They invented writing. The first writing, cuneiform, was essentially a form of accounting, a way to record bushels of barley and heads of cattle. But this simple act of scratching marks onto a clay tablet was the moment that we, as a species, crossed the final great threshold. It was the moment we stepped out of the vast, silent, and unrecorded depths of prehistory and into the shallow, noisy, and brightly lit waters of recorded history. And it is here that our long, slow, and patient journey through the Cenozoic Era must come to a close. We have traveled 66 million years from the ashes of the Great Extinction to the dawn of the first civilizations. We have witnessed the rise of our own mammalian dynasty. We have walked through the great ice ages, and we have followed the footsteps of our own ancestors as they evolved from small, clever apes into the undisputed masters of the planet. The world we now stand in is a familiar one, a world of cities, of nations, of writing, and of history. It is our world, the unbroken thread. With the invention of writing, in the great river valleys of the ancient world, our own species began to create a new kind of fossil record. It was not a record of bone preserved in stone, but of thought preserved in symbol. For the first time on this planet, a creature began to consciously record its own history, its laws, its myths, and its memories. This is the world of history, a story that is, by the standards of our long journey, incredibly young. The entirety of recorded human history, from the first Sumerian clay tablets to the words you are hearing now, spans a mere 5,000 years. It is a brief, bright, and noisy moment, but the world it is built upon is ancient, silent, and immeasurably deep. To truly understand our place in the Cenozoic, we must see our own time for what it is, the very newest, thinnest layer of a vast and ancient geology of life. The story of our world is like an immense library, filled with millions of volumes that tell the tale of every epoch and every era. The story of our own civilizations is but a single recently written page in the final book of the final volume, and all that came before, the immense silent volumes that tell the tale of the mammals, the dinosaurs, and the first simple cells, is the foundation upon which our own small story rests. Echoes of a deeper past. Let's reflect for a moment on the profound inheritance that is written into our very being. The iron in your blood, which carries oxygen to your cells, was forged in the heart of a colossal, long-dead star that exploded billions of years ago, seeding the nebula from which our solar system was born. The water that makes up the majority of your body is the same ancient water that once fell in a million-year deluge to form the primordial oceans. The complex, eukaryotic cells that form your tissues are the product of a 2 billion-year-old act of symbiosis, a great merger between ancient microbes that created the mitochondrial engines that power your every thought and every breath. Your own body plan, the bilateral symmetry, the head, the spinal cord, is a blueprint that was first laid down in a humble, worm-like creature that swam in the seas of the Cambrian explosion over 500 million years ago. The very bones of your hand are a modification of the fin bones of a lobe-finned fish, like Tiktaalik, that used them to prop itself up in the shallows of a Devonian swamp. And the amniotic egg, the private ocean that freed our vertebrate ancestors from the water, is the same fundamental technology that in a modified form allowed you to grow safely within your own mother. The 66 million year story of the Cenozoic is simply the most recent chapter of this unbroken thread. The great cataclysm that ended the age of dinosaurs was not just an extinction, it was the great enabling event of our own world. The fall of that ancient empire was the necessary precondition for the rise of our own. Without that random, cosmic accident, our small, shrew-like ancestors would have likely remained in the shadows, and the world we know today, the Age of Mammals, would never have been born. The legacy of our own age. The journey we have just taken, through the 66 million years of the Cenozoic, is the direct story of our own origins. The world we inhabit today, in its entirety, was forged in the fires of this era. The world we walk on, the very shape of our continents, the positions of our oceans, the height of our mountain ranges, like the Himalayas, the Alps, and the Andes, are all the product of the slow, relentless continental drift of the Cenozoic. The world was given its modern face during our age. The air we breathe, the climate we experience, this unique icehouse state with its polar ice caps and its temperate seasons, is the direct legacy of the great cooling event that began when Antarctica became isolated. The great forests, and most importantly, the vast grasslands that feed our civilizations, are all products of this cooler, more seasonal world. The life around us, every wild mammal on Earth today, from the great blue whale to the smallest field mouse, is a product of the explosive evolutionary radiation that we have just explored. They are our cousins, fellow survivors of the great extinction, fellow inheritors of the Cenozoic world. And our own story, the story of humanity, is perhaps the most profound legacy of all. We are the children of the Cenozoic. Our primate lineage was born in the hothouse jungles of the Eocene. Our defining trait, our bipedalism, was a response to the shrinking of those forests and the spread of the Miocene savannas, and our greatest asset, our large, creative, and problem-solving brain, was forged in the relentless, unforgiving crucible of the Pleistocene ice ages. We are not an exception to the story of the Cenozoic. We are its ultimate and most unlikely expression, the perspective of deep time. And so, our long journey comes to its final, quiet close. We have traveled from the ashes of a fallen world to the dawn of our own. We have seen how life, in the face of near total annihilation, did not just survive, but thrived, diversifying into a world of new and wondrous forms. We have seen how our own lineage, a small and insignificant branch of the great tree of life, was shaped by the immense and indifferent forces of continental drift, of climate change, and of cosmic chance. The story of the Cenozoic, and the even deeper story of all the ages that came before it, gives us the gift of perspective. It reminds us that our own time, our own civilization, our entire human world, is but a fleeting moment, a brief, warm interglacial period in a long and ongoing ice age, a single bright spark in the immense dark expanse of deep time. In the last few thousand years, with the invention of agriculture and industry, our own species has itself become a geological force, capable of altering the climate and the biosphere in ways that rival the great natural events of the past. The great, silent library of the Earth's history is all around us, written in the rocks, in the fossils, and in the very DNA of every living thing. It is a story of profound and constant change, a story of dynasties rising and falling, a story of resilience, and a story of the deep, intricate, and often fragile interconnectedness of all life. As we stand here, in our own brief moment, and look towards our own uncertain future, the greatest wisdom we can find may come from looking back into this deep and silent past. As you now drift into a deep and final, peaceful sleep, may you feel the quiet wonder of that immense, unbroken story and your own small, but precious, and miraculous place within it, the lost worlds of the South. As we journey back into the Cenozoic, it is important to remember that the world was not a single, unified stage. The breakup of the great supercontinent, Pangaea, had set the continents on a long, slow journey of separation, and for much of the Age of Mammals, for tens of millions of years, South America, Australia, and Antarctica were great island continents, cut off from the evolutionary developments of the Northern Hemisphere. In these isolated realms, life took a different and often stranger path. The splendid isolation of South America. For nearly 60 million years, South America was an island after it separated from Antarctica, but before the Isthmus of Panama rose to connect it to the north, it became a unique and self-contained world. The great extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs had left this continent, like all others, with a cast of humble survivors, But here, the story unfolded differently. The mammals that came to dominate were not the familiar placental lineages of horses, rhinos, and cats that were rising in North America and Eurasia. Instead, South America became a realm of marsupials, of strange, native ungulates, hoofed mammals, and most terrifyingly of all, of the great terror birds. For millions of years, the role of the apex predator on this island continent was held not by a mammal, but by a living echo of the dinosaurian age. These were the phorussacids, the terror birds. A creature, like the mighty Kelinkin, from the Miocene, was a formidable and terrifying hunter. It stood up to 3 meters, or 10 feet, tall, making it the largest predatory bird of all time. It could not fly, but its long, powerful legs were built for running down prey with incredible speed across the open savannas. Its most devastating weapon was its head. It had a massive, eagle-like skull, over 2 feet long, and at the end of it was a huge, hooked, and razor-sharp beak. It would have used this beak not for slicing, but like a biological pickaxe, striking downwards with the immense power of its neck muscles to deliver a single devastating and fatal blow to its victims. These great birds were the undisputed kings of South America for tens of millions of years. Beneath them, a strange and wonderful menagerie of native hoofed herbivores evolved, filling the niches that would be occupied by deer, horses, and antelope on other continents. There were the light upturns, a group of long-legged runners. Their most famous member, which survived long enough to be seen by the first humans in South America, was the bizarre macrauchenia. It looked like a camel, with the legs of a rhino and a long, graceful neck. Its most peculiar feature was that its nasal opening was on the top of its head, suggesting it possessed a short, flexible trunk like that of a tapir. There were also the notungulates, an incredibly diverse group that evolved into forms resembling everything from rabbits to rhinos. The most famous was the mighty toxodon, a creature the size of a black rhino, with a broad, hippo-like head and powerful, squat limbs. And preying on these strange herbivores were not just the terror birds, but also a unique dynasty of marsupial predators. In a stunning example of convergent evolution, they evolved a creature that looked and acted almost exactly like the saber-toothed cats of the north. This was Thylacophilus, the marsupial saber-tooth. It was a powerful, jaguar-sized predator with a pair of colossal, ever-growing canine teeth. To protect these enormous teeth, it had evolved a pair of unique, bony flanges that grew down from its lower jaw, a scabbard of bone for its saber-like weapons. The land of pouches, an Australian story. If South America was a strange and unique world, Australia was even more so. Its even greater and more prolonged isolation meant that it became a world almost entirely dominated by a single group of mammals, the marsupials. Having arrived on the continent before it was fully separated, the marsupials radiated into every available ecological niche, producing a spectacular and unique megafauna of their own. The role of the giant herbivore was filled by creatures like Diprotodon, the marsupial rhino. This was the largest marsupial of all time, a wombat the size of a hippopotamus, a slow-moving, powerful grazer that roamed the open woodlands of Ice Age Australia in great herds. There were also the giant, short-faced kangaroos, like Procoptodon, which stood over 2 meters tall and was far more robustly built than any kangaroo today. Its single large toe on each foot suggests it could not hop, but instead walked bipedally, like a person. And the role of the apex predator was filled by one of the most remarkable and specialized mammalian carnivores of all time, Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion. Though not a true cat, it was a predator of incredible power. It had a robust, lion-like body, and its forelimbs were immensely powerful, tipped with a huge, retractable, cat-like claw on each thumb, which it would have used to hold on to its struggling prey. But its most terrifying feature was its teeth. Instead of saber-like canines, its killing teeth were a pair of huge, blade-like premolars, which acted like a pair of enormous, flesh-cutting bolt cutters, giving it a bite of incredible shearing power. And Australia was not just a land of strange mammals, it was also home to its own reptilian giants, including a colossal, 7-meter-long goanna called megalania, and a giant, terrestrial crocodile called quincana. The Great Collision and the end of isolation. For tens of millions of years, these isolated worlds flourished, but their splendid isolation was not destined to last forever. Around 3 million years ago, the great geological forces of plate tectonics pushed the Isthmus of Panama up from the sea, creating a land bridge that connected North and South America for the first time in an eternity. This initiated the Great American Biotic Interchange. What followed was a great, continental-scale biological invasion. The highly evolved and competitive placental mammals from the north, the great saber-toothed cats, the wolves, the bears, the horses, the camels, and the elephants, streamed southwards across this new land bridge. At the same time, the southern animals, like the giant ground sloths and the glyptodonts, moved north. But the competition was not an equal one. The northern invaders, having been forged in the crucible of a much larger and more competitive continental ecosystem, were devastatingly effective. The great terror birds, the strange native ungulates, and the marsupial saber-tooths of South America could not compete with this new wave of highly efficient predators and grazers. Within a few million years, the unique ancient fauna of South America had been almost completely replaced. Australia's isolation, however, continued until the arrival of a new and unprecedented kind of invasive species. Between 65 and 50,000 years ago, the first humans, and shortly after their arrival, the great megafauna of Australia, the giant kangaroos, the diprotodons, and the marsupial lions, vanished forever in an extinction event that mirrors the disappearance of the megafauna in the Americas at the end of the last ice age. These lost worlds are a poignant reminder of the creative power of evolution and of the fragility of isolated ecosystems. They are the great parallel stories of the Age of Mammals, a testament to the fact that our own history is not the only one that was written on the face of the Cenozoic Earth. But this is not the end of the story of life. It is merely the end of a chapter. For in the deepest, darkest corners of this ruined world, life, in its most humble, resourceful, and resilient forms, had found a way to endure. The key to survival was not strength, or size, or specialization. It was the ability to live on the wreckage of the old world. A new food chain had been established. A food chain based not on sunlight and living plants, but on decay. The world was now filled with an almost limitless supply of dead organic matter, the rotting logs of the great forests, the decaying carcasses of the dinosaurs, and the very soil itself, rich with dormant seeds and hibernating insects. And it was the creatures that could tap into this detritus food web that would become the inheritors of the earth. The small, burrowing mammals, the freshwater turtles and crocodiles, and the seed-eating birds. For them, the long, dark, impact winter was not just an age of death. It was the beginning of their opportunity, the dawn of their own new world, the new oceans. The seas of the early Paleocene epoch were a world of ghosts. The great extinction event had been a profound marine catastrophe. The majestic mosasaurs and the long-necked plesiosaurs were gone forever. The beautiful, spiral-shelled ammonites, which had filled the oceans for over 300 million years, had vanished completely. And most critically, the very foundation of the marine food web, the microscopic, sun-loving phytoplankton, had been almost entirely wiped out by the long, dark years of the impact winter. The oceans were a clear, sterile, and eerily quiet world, a vast, empty stage waiting for a new cast of characters. The slow recovery. Life's recovery in the sea, as on the land, was a slow, patient, and methodical process. The first to return were the smallest. The surviving species of phytoplankton, the microscopic algae, began to bloom once more in the sunlit surface waters, slowly rebuilding the base of the food chain. As they flourished, so too did the small creatures that fed upon them. In this new empty ocean, the telos fish, the group that includes almost all modern bony fish, underwent an explosive evolutionary radiation. With their primary reptilian predators gone, they diversified with incredible speed, evolving into the ancestors of the tuna, the cod, the salmon, and the countless other forms that dominate the seas today. And with this new abundance of fish, a new dynasty of apex predators rose to take the place of the mosasaurs. The sharks, which had been secondary players for much of the Mesozoic, now seized the opportunity. They radiated into a host of new and powerful forms, including the first giant mackerel-eating sharks and the ancestors of the modern great white. For the first few million years of the Cenozoic, the oceans belonged to the sharks and the bony fish, but a new and unexpected challenger was about to enter the water, an animal that would change the very nature of the marine world forever. The Great Return, the conquest of the whales. This is one of the most beautiful and complete stories in the entire history of evolution. The story of how a group of land-dwelling hoofed mammals returned to the sea and over millions of years transformed themselves into the magnificent whales of our modern world. Our story begins around 50 million years ago in the warm, shallow Tethys Sea in what is now Pakistan. Here, in the coastal swamps and river deltas, lived a small, deer-like, hoofed mammal called Indohus. It was a land animal, but isotopic analysis of its bones shows that it spent a great deal of its time in the water, perhaps hiding from predators. Its most important feature was in its skull. It possessed a unique, thick, and dense bony structure in its middle ear called an involucrum, a feature found in only one other group of animals in all of history, the cetaceans, the whales, dolphins, and porpoises. This was the first, faint clue to a profound evolutionary journey. A few million years later, we find a creature like Pachydus. It was also a land dweller, with a long wolf-like body and 4 legs. It was a predator, living on the shores of the rivers and lakes, but its ear bones show that it was even more adapted for hearing underwater. It was a creature with 1 foot on the land and 1 foot in the water. And then we meet Ambulosaurus, the walking whale. This was a truly transitional creature, a living, breathing mosaic of 2 different worlds. It was the size of a large sea lion, with a long crocodile-like snout and powerful jaws. It could still walk, clumsily, on the land, its large webbed hind feet splaying out to the sides. But in the water, it was a powerful and graceful swimmer, using its huge feet and a powerful, undulating motion of its spine to propel itself through the water, an ambush predator that was equally at home in both realms. The journey from here accelerated. Creatures like Rhodosis became even more marine. Its nostrils had begun their long, slow march from the tip of the snout towards the top of the head, on their way to becoming a blowhole. Its hind limbs had shrunk, becoming almost useless for walking, and its tail had developed a powerful, flattened fluke for propulsion. It was now a creature of the sea. This incredible journey culminates in the late Eocene with the spectacular and terrifying Basilosaurus. This was a true, fully aquatic whale, but it looked nothing like the whales of our time. Its body was immense and impossibly long and serpentine, up to 18 meters in length. It was the apex predator of the Eocene seas, its long jaws filled with a fearsome combination of sharp, conical front teeth for grasping and triangular, serrated back teeth for shearing flesh. And yet, it still carried the ghost of its terrestrial past. Near the back of its long, sinuous body, it still possessed a pair of tiny, perfectly formed, but completely useless hind legs, complete with a tiny femur, tibia, and even tiny little toes. A final, poignant, and beautiful reminder of a time just 10 million years before, when its ancestors had walked on the land. The final transformation, and a new king. As the world cooled at the end of the Eocene, and the cold, nutrient-rich Antarctic circumpolar current was born, the whales underwent their final great transformation. The abundance of krill and small fish in the new colder oceans drove the evolution of the Mystices, the baleen whales. Early forms still had teeth, but they also developed the first simple baleen plates for filter feeding. The other lineage, the Odontocetes, or toothed whales, became specialized hunters of the deep, evolving the sophisticated biological sonar of echolocation. This was the birth of the dolphins, the porpoises, and the great sperm whales. But as these new intelligent and diverse whales filled the oceans of the Miocene, they attracted the attention of a new and even more powerful predator. The sharks had continued to evolve, and in the Miocene seas, they produced the largest and most powerful predatory shark of all time, Otodus megalodon. Image comparing the size of a megalodon shark to a human and a great white shark. This was a creature of almost unbelievable scale. While a modern great white shark might reach 6 meters in length, megalodon could reach up to 18 or even 20 meters, 3 times as long and perhaps 50 times as heavy. Its jaws were over 2 meters wide, large enough to swallow a small car, and they were lined with hundreds of huge, serrated teeth, some over 7 inches long. It was the primary predator of the new medium-sized whales that were now abundant. A true monster of the deep, the undisputed and ultimate apex predator of the Cenozoic oceans. For over 20 million years, megalodon reigned supreme before a final wave of global cooling in the Pliocene changed the ocean currents, dispersed its whale prey, and drove this magnificent, terrifying, and ultimate shark to extinction. The oceans of today, with their great baleen whales and their intelligent echolocating dolphins, were now in place, the echoes of a lost world. Our journey through the Cenozoic era has been a story of recovery, of innovation, and of the relentless shaping of our modern world. We have seen how life, in the wake of the great cataclysm that ended the age of dinosaurs, did not just survive, but erupted in a glorious and spectacular new radiation. We have seen the continents drift into their familiar positions, the climate shift from a global hothouse to a world of ice, and the rise of our own mammalian dynasty to a position of global dominance. And we have seen how our own lineage, a small and unassuming branch of the great primate tree, was forged in the fires of these immense environmental changes. But the story of the Cenozoic is not merely a history of a distant and disconnected past. It is the direct and immediate story of the world we live in now. The ground beneath our feet, the air we breathe, and the very fabric of the life that surrounds us are all a direct inheritance from this long and dramatic age. And as our own species, Homo sapiens, has itself become a geological force, a creature capable of altering the planet on a global scale, the echoes of the deep past offer us a profound and humbling perspective. The story of the Cenozoic is a story filled with lessons, with warnings, and with a quiet and enduring wisdom, echoes of the hothouse. Whoa! Let us cast our minds back, one last time, to the world of the early Eocene. We explored the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PATM, a geologically brief period of intense and rapid global warming, driven by a massive release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This was perhaps the most dramatic natural climate change event of the last 66 million years. We saw its effects. The oceans became acidic, causing a mass extinction in the deep sea. The polar regions became subtropical jungles, and terrestrial animals were forced to migrate or adapt with incredible speed. The PTM is a profound and ancient echo of our own modern predicament. It serves as a natural experiment, a record, written in the stone and the fossils, of what happens when the planet's climate system is pushed too far, too fast. It reminds us that the Earth's climate is not a static thing, but a delicate and dynamic balance, and that this balance can be catastrophically disrupted. The story of the Eocene, with its crocodiles and palm trees in the Arctic, is a stark and powerful reminder of just how different our world can be and how quickly it can change. Echoes of the ice house. Our journey then took us into the great cooling, the long, slow slide into the ice house world that began with the isolation and freezing of Antarctica. We witnessed the retreat of the great global forests and the birth of a new and revolutionary habitat, the grasslands. The rise of the grasslands was a response to a cooler, drier, and more seasonal climate, but these vast ecosystems, in turn, began to shape the planet themselves. They created new soils, altered rainfall patterns, and locked up vast amounts of carbon, helping to stabilize the new, cooler climate. Their story is a lesson in the powerful feedback loops that exist between life and the planet. a reminder that ecosystems are not just passive inhabitants of the world, but are active participants in its creation. And then, we entered the Pleistocene, the great ice ages. We saw how small, predictable wobbles in the Earth's orbit, the Milankovitch cycles, could trigger the advance and retreat of colossal continent-spanning glaciers. This is perhaps the most profound lesson of all in the Cenozoic climate story, that the Earth's climate system is an incredibly sensitive one, prone to dramatic and often violent oscillations between states of deep ice and periods of warm interglacial thaw. The world we live in today, this warm and stable period of the Holocene, is not the norm. It is a brief and precious interlude in a long and ongoing ice age. And at the end of this last great glacial period, we witnessed the Quaternary extinction event, the great death of the megafauna, the woolly mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, and the giant ground sloths, all vanished in a geological instant. Their extinction, driven by the 1-2 punch of rapid climate change and the arrival of a new, incredibly sophisticated human hunter, is a poignant and sobering echo. It was the first great extinction event that our own species was directly implicated in, a prelude to the immense impact that we would have on the planet in the millennia to come, the unbroken thread, and our moment in time. And so, our long and patient journey comes to its final, quiet close. We have traveled 66 million years from the desolate, ash-covered world of the Paleocene dawn to the vibrant and complex world of our own Holocene. We have seen how the humble, shrew-like survivors of the Great Extinction radiated into the magnificent and diverse Age of Mammals. We have followed the epic story of the whales as they returned to the sea. We have walked with the strange, lost beasts of South America and Australia, and we have traced, step by step, the incredible and unlikely journey of our own ancestors, from a small, clever ape in a shrinking forest, to a bipedal toolmaker, to a fire-wielding global traveler, and finally, to the last, lone, and profoundly symbolic human species on Earth. The story of the Cenozoic is the story of our own origins. It is the story of the world that made us. The fall of the dinosaurs was the great, empty stage upon which our own play could begin. The rise of the grasslands was the environmental pressure that forced our ancestors onto 2 feet, and the relentless, unforgiving challenges of the great ice ages were the final, fiery crucible that forged our large brains and our capacity for culture, for cooperation, and for innovation. When we look back across this immense and beautiful history, we are not looking at a separate, disconnected story. We are looking at our own story. The history of life is a single, immense, and unbroken thread. It connects every living thing on our planet today, including you and me, in a single, vast, and ancient family tree that stretches back, uninterrupted, for nearly 4 billion years. And today, as we stand in our own brief and fleeting moment, we have ourselves become a geological force. The changes that our own global civilization are now making to the atmosphere, to the oceans, and to the biosphere are occurring at a speed and a scale that rivals the great natural events of the deep past. The great story of the Cenozoic, with its cycles of warming and cooling, of extinction and radiation, is a profound and humbling teacher. It reminds us of the incredible resilience of life, but also of its profound fragility. It reminds us that no dynasty, no matter how powerful or successful, is permanent, and it reminds us that we are not separate from the great, intricate web of life on this planet, but are a part of it, and are now, for the first time in 4.5 billion years, its conscious and responsible stewards. As you now drift into a deep and final peaceful sleep, may you feel the quiet wonder of that immense, unbroken story, and your own small, but precious, and miraculous place within it.